Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Dewan Rakyat was not able to vote on a constitutional amendment that was tabled at a special sitting yesterday. This was meant to pave the way for a new anti-hopping law. So instead, what happened was a Parliamentary Select Committee will now be established to further deliberate the bill. Another special sitting is expected to be called in May to consider and pass the revised amendments. Are such delays just part of the process of creating better laws? Let's ask our first guest tonight, lawyer Sin Yew. Sin Yew, can you help us understand what exactly is contentious about the current framing of the constitutional amendment?
Hi, good evening. I think I will have to rewind a bit to explain what was actually tabled, and then from that we would know what was actually the contention. So there were two amendment bills. The first was shelved, and the second one was what we heard debated in the Dewan Rakyat yesterday. And the first bill, the reason why it was shelved was because Cabinet felt that the definition of party hopping it wasn't clear enough. And rightly so, if I may add. So under that proposed First Amendment, what would have been the law is that if a MP or a adun is no longer a member of a political party because he could have been resigned or sacked or for whatever reason ceased to be a member of the political party, his or her seat will be vacated and there will be a by-election. So that itself is very problematic because we have a situation where the political party would hold great power over the MP or the adun. So in a case where the MP or the adun disagrees with the party and for whatever reason does not toe the party line because it could be against the interest of his or her constituency, then MP and adun will be constrained to act against the constituency's interests for fear of being expelled by the political party. So this actually means that the MP and adun will in fact be representing the political party instead of his or her constituencies. And in a representative democracy, that does not work because representative democracy requires the MP or adun to represent us, not the political party. And
Sin Yew, can I ask you? Yeah. I think Bersih has come up with a remedy, which is just to take that out. That that expulsion from a party does not constitute a hopping.
It doesn't work as well because I'll use an example. Let's take the Sheraton move. It's our favorite example. We always go back there. So the Sheraton move under the proposed law, it could not be prevented because in a Sheraton move, it's a situation where an entire party left the coalition, even though we all understand them to be part of PH and voted them because they are part of PH. So even with Bersih's proposed solution, that won't prevent Sheraton move as well. And again, on the Sheraton move example, what if a MP who is from Bersatu does not want to follow the party line and decide to resign from the party as a result? And we say that hey, that's actually quite conscientious because you don't want to betray the will of the people, and that MP would be the MP would lose his seat. And
but so, if I could just using the Sheraton move, what about the MPs who are from PKR? I mean, isn't that more to the point? The fact that Azmin Ali Zuraida and all Saifuddin Abdullah left the party, would they have run foul of the law?
Yes, they would. They would lose their seat. But again, that to us who are not constituents of Gombak, we may feel that that's actually a good thing. But what about those constituents in Gombak, those voters in Gombak, who feels that that's actually the right, he's actually entitled to do that. Azmin Ali is actually making a very conscientious move because they may not believe in leadership of PKR anymore. So that too, under the proposed amendment, does not take into account what the voters think. and that is also unsatisfactory. So that's why the conversation then shifts to how then can we deal with all these different types of scenario, as well as take into account the will of the people. Because if there is a doubt as to whether or not the mandate of the people has been betrayed, the best remedy, in my view, is to go back to the people and ask them. So recall petitions is another proposed solution proposed by a number of other parties, including YB Azalina.
Sin Yew, just on that note, can I ask you, is it better to pass a flawed law and then tweak it later? Oh, because you said in the start that this was the right decision, rightly so, to delay the anti-hopping bill. But what about those who say, pass it now, tweak it later?
No. That's a very bad idea, because this is a constitutional amendment. You need 2/3. It's not an ordinary legislation. If you change the constitution permanently, there is no guarantee that the next government, if I can put it that way, is going to secure a 2/3 majority to amend the constitution and make it right. And the constitutional amendments should not be taken lightly. And I think it was the right move to shelve it, because once the constitution is amended, you have a situation where political parties then have a lot of power. And as we know, political parties, they're not saints. Once they have secured great power, why would they willingly let it go? And to put them in such a position where it could be very dangerous to our democracy, is not something that I'm willing to risk, and I don't think that is something that the MPs should be risking as well. But the problem is that the MPs. Yep.
Yes, I just want to ask you, if in many ways, I mean, you're arguing based on a notion about Westminster-style parliamentary democracy, right? That people vote individuals. The individuals might not be from a political party, so on and so forth. But is that actually how voters think? Is the whole discourse on betrayal and so on and so forth really based on a very Malaysian-specific, historically contingent sense of what parliamentary democracy here is, which is a kind of a hybrid, right, that does look at parties?
Yeah, I agree with you, Sharaad, that when it comes to the ground, people vote for the political party and perhaps not so much the MP. And that is why we need to have I think the hybrid system, where you have certain circumstances, or what I would call triggering events, where the MPs resign, sacked, or expelled from the party. That alone is not sufficient to call for a by-election. It needs to go with a recall petition, and then you can actually ascertain whether or not the voters of that MP's or Adun's constituency want the MPs to be replaced. But to shift it entirely to them leaving the political party as a reason for the seat to be vacated, I don't think that's too fair on the voters. And if anything, the Sheraton move taught us a lot of lessons. It has taught us that it perhaps it's not just the party that people are angry about. Perhaps it's not just the MPs that people are angry about. Sometimes in Sheraton move situation, it is the party rather than the individual.
Right. Sin Yew, thank you for joining us on the show tonight. That was Lawyer Sin Yew. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We will be back with more. Stay tuned.
Semua yang terjadi adalah berita, tetapi tiada siapa yang boleh bawakan yang terkini dan tergempar seperti kami.
Dilihat hanya memberi wang tanpa matlamat yang tepat. Dia tidak melakukan apa-apa kesalahan.
Untuk mendapatkan jawapan yang bermakna, Kita perlu soalan yang tepat.
Amat sedih dengan apa yang berlaku kat atas.
Tiada ruang untuk berita palsu.
Negara kita telah merekodkan kes harian baru sebanyak
Hanya fakta yang diberikan.
Amat penting untuk meneruskan perjuangan negara melawan pandemik ini.
Sentiasa memastikan suara anda, suara rakyat didengari.
Kenapa?
Membawakan apa yang penting di mana sahaja anda berada.
Kerana kita hendak putuskan rantaian jangkitan.
Belanjawan dan pendekatan bertemakan survival ini secara keseluruhan.
Teruskan bersama kami, Astro Awani, saluran berita yang paling dipercayai rakyat Malaysia.
Kita berhadapan dengan situasi pandemik yang agak luar biasa. Self-control, self-lockdown itu penting. Lebih kurang pergerakan, maka lebih sukar untuk COVID menjangkit kita.
untuk tempoh 2 minggu ini duduk di rumah. Kalau kita boleh laksanakan KKP Kendiri dan keluarga,
Saya kira insyaAllah kita boleh berjaya. Akhirnya kita menang.
Semua yang terjadi adalah berita, tetapi tiada siapa yang boleh bawakan yang terkini dan tergempar seperti kami.
Dilihat hanya memberi wang tanpa matlamat yang tepat.
Dia tidak melakukan apa-apa kesalahan.
Untuk mendapatkan jawapan yang bermakna, kita perlu soalan yang tepat.
Amat sedih dengan apa yang berlaku kat atas.
Tiada ruang untuk berita palsu.
negara kita telah merekodkan kes harian baru sebanyak
Hanya fakta yang diberikan.
Amat penting untuk meneruskan perjuangan negara melawan pandemik ini.
Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa. Idris. With me is Sharaad, Kuttan. Let's continue our look at what is yet another setback for an anti-party hopping law. This after lawmakers deferred their vote on a constitutional amendment that would have enabled the law to be enacted. Our next guest is Tharma Pillai. He's the co-founder of Undi 18. Tharma, should we, the public, be concerned over the seemingly endless delays to table and pass an anti-hopping bill, or should we kind of just give it time for all the problems to be resolved, for all the kinks to be worked out?
All right. Firstly, thank you very much for having me. I think in terms of whether the public should be concerned or not, I do think that's, of course, cause for concern, because if you think about it, the MOU between Pakatan Harapan and also the Keluarga Malaysia government was signed all the way in September last year, and we're already in April, right? And we really haven't found any sort of solution of what this party hopping bill would, anti-party hopping bill would look like, even after so many months have passed. So I do think that that is one cause for concern. But on the other hand, I'm a firm believer that it's better that we wait for a good bill to be passed than to rush and allow a bad bill to go through just for the sake of it. And unfortunately, if you look at the text in terms of what was being brought forward in Parliament before this over the weekend, on Friday, we were able to read some of the text that was written. Unfortunately, it would have been a really bad bill. It would have been a really harmful constitutional amendment. So I do think that the decision to take a step back and discuss this further and perhaps look at different alternatives, I think that's for the best. And I do think that the public, I guess we just have to understand, I hope.
So, Tharma, do you think part of the anxiety really comes from the question of the impending general election, that if there is no amendment or no such law, rather, in time for the next general election, voters are going to be left high and dry. They'll vote for somebody with certain expectations that will be thwarted, or worse still, they will decide not to vote because they think the system is designed in a way to, kind of serve the interests of cynical politicians.
I do think that's certainly an issue. When we went to the ground during the Johor state elections, during the Melaka state elections, and when we also did our own checking during the Sharaad state elections, there was a very similar sentiment, especially amongst urban voters. Because if you think about it, urban voters are the ones that have to travel back. They are the ones who have to maybe even sometimes take a leave the day before the elections so that they can travel. They're going to have a babysitter. They're going to plan all these things. So for them, there's a sentiment where, why do I even bother to vote if these people are not, we don't even know if these people will stay loyal to what we voted for. The next day they might flip over. In a few months they might just change parties. So I do think that there is that mistrust towards democracy, and I think that really has shaken, I think, the credibility of our democratic system. So having an anti-party hopping law is something that's so important in terms of rebuilding that trust. But I do want to emphasize, I think we've discussed a lot about, even the previous panelists, Sin Yew has discussed the difference and the balance that we had between having a party-centric anti-party hopping law versus a rakyat or people-centric law, which is the recall election. So for me, I do think that the better alternative is definitely the recall election, because again, it sort of addresses many of the issues, or that sense that where I don't have any power over the say of my politicians. Even if my MP or my adun does a bad job, there's no recourse for me to sort of recall them and try to get a better MP or an adun. It's just basically I have the right to vote for like once every 4 to 5 years, and that's it. I do think that is not a efficient or sufficient system, and I do think that having some sort of alternative laws, especially a recall election, might be one of the best ways to restore trust and also engagement into our democratic system.
Right. A little earlier in the conversation, you said that it's better not to rush a bad law into being enacted, to take your time to work out the kinks. I'm just wondering, I mean, based on your experience with lowering the voting age, that entire movement, I think, took years, right? So it was, 3 years in the making even before it went for a vote. And I'm just wondering, because you mentioned, well, the MOU was signed last year in September. That's not a lot of time to work out the kinks. What do you think will be acceptable given the time frame that we're thinking about, with GE15 looming on the horizon? How do we ensure that those two things are balanced?
I do think that one of the important things that we have to look at the context of it is that when you look at the current situation that we're in, I think there was a great amount of emphasis put onto anti-party hopping, especially compared to most other things on the MOU, right? I do think that in terms of the engagement that was being done so far, perhaps there could have been better engagement with civil society, with academia, with people who are outside of the political realms, because many of these ideas came true. In fact, I think it was Dato' Sri Azalina who did engagements with civil society, especially with Bersih, in formulating her own private members bill in order to address anti-party hopping, and her solution was recall elections, right? So I do think that many of these ideas are already out there. So I don't really think it's an issue of trying to formulate the bill, or it's an issue of trying to get the right ideas. It's really a matter of trying to put those bills together, put those ideas together, and negotiate and discuss. And as we've seen, even during the Undi 18 bill, yes, the effort towards it took many years, but once there was the political will, there was a political intention to make it happen, it only took a few months. I think it was only in 2000.
Okay, Tama, because we're running out of time,
yeah.
very
Sure.
very quickly. Why is it that the recall election idea doesn't seem to be the way that both government and the major stakeholders are sort of going? Azalina seems to be kind of on the margins of this in this conversation. What sticks in the throat of most stakeholders about the recall?
The simplest reason is because many politicians themselves don't understand it, and it's because it's a bit too complicated. There's many layers to it. Just because of that, I think many of them have preferred a simpler version, which is if you jump, you automatically lose your seat. I think it's just the simplicity of one version of the law that is more appealing for many politicians, because it's easier for them to understand and explain. But I don't believe that complexity of law makes it a bad law. In fact, in this case, the complexity makes it more nuanced and better for democracy as a whole.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Tharma, for joining us on the show tonight. Tharma Pillay, co-founder of Undi 18 there. Another quick break here on the show. We will be back with more on this topic, so don't go anywhere.
Semua yang terjadi adalah berita, tetapi tiada siapa yang boleh bawakan yang terkini dan tergempar seperti kami.
Dilihat hanya memberi wang tanpa matlamat yang tepat.
Dia tidak melakukan apa-apa kesalahan.
Untuk mendapatkan jawapan yang bermakna, Kita perlu soalan yang tepat.
Amat sedih dengan apa yang berlaku kat atas.
Tiada ruang untuk berita palsu.
Negara kita telah merekodkan kes harian baru sebanyak
Hanya fakta yang diberikan.
Amat penting untuk meneruskan perjuangan negara melawan pandemik ini.
Sentiasa memastikan suara anda, suara rakyat didengari.
Kenapa?
Membawakan apa yang penting di mana sahaja anda berada.
Kerana kita hendak putuskan rantaian jangkitan.
Belanjawan dan pendekatan bertemakan survival ini secara keseluruhan.
Teruskan bersama kami, Astro Awani, saluran berita yang paling dipercayai rakyat Malaysia.
Kita berhadapan dengan situasi pandemik yang agak luar biasa. Self-control, self-lockdown itu penting. Lebih kurang pergerakan, maka lebih sukar untuk COVID menjangkit kita.
untuk tempoh 2 minggu ini duduk di rumah. Kalau kita boleh laksanakan KKP Kendiri dan keluarga,
saya kira insyaAllah kita boleh berjaya. Akhirnya kita menang.
Semua yang terjadi adalah berita, tetapi tiada siapa yang boleh bawakan yang terkini dan tergempar seperti kami.
Dilihat hanya memberi wang tanpa matlamat yang tepat.
Dia tidak melakukan apa-apa kesalahan.
Untuk mendapatkan jawapan yang bermakna, kita perlu soalan yang tepat.
Amat sedih dengan apa yang berlaku kat atas.
Tiada ruang untuk berita palsu.
negara kita telah merekodkan kes harian baru sebanyak
Hanya fakta yang
Thank you so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Progress of the anti-party hopping law has been marred by many delays, but should we accept this as part of the process of creating better laws? Let's speak now to Ira Azhari, Senior Manager of the Democracy and Governance Unit at the think tank Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, better known by its acronym IDEAS. Ira, this decision to delay the vote and instead set up a Parliamentary Select Committee to refine the anti-hopping bill, was that the right move in your opinion?
Thanks, Melisa. I think, in fact, the Parliamentary Select Committee should have been set up first. So I think they're kind of doing it the other way around. So, before a constitutional amendment, especially one as serious as this, or a new bill is going to be introduced, I think the pathway should be to go through a Parliamentary Select Committee first, for it to be scrutinized and further debated in more detail, and perhaps you can get experts to weigh in, and then only you sort of bring it to the chamber of the Dewan Rakyat to then be debated by all the MPs. So my take is that I think they're kind of doing it the other way around. Although I would say I wouldn't discourage it. I think it is a positive development, because something as complicated as this, there just wouldn't be time to get into the details in the Dewan. So I think it is a good thing, and I think it is the right thing. Will it add to more delay? It will. It definitely will. But in this case, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because an amendment such as this will have very far-reaching consequences for our democracy, for our political climate. So it is right that it is being deliberated upon more carefully. And I do hope that there is room for experts to come in. Yeah.
Right, Ira. So this is very interesting, because one of the things that I guess the 2018 general election tried to do, when Pakatan Harapan came to power, was to shift the balance of governance from executive dominance and bring Parliament back to to its proper form, right, and place in the nation. So when you listen to the debate, because our previous guest Tamar Pillai said that he thinks that the preferences in terms of legislation are being driven by the lack of understanding among legislators about these laws and the consequences. That basically they're choosing the simpler option because they don't understand the more complex option. Do you agree with that? I mean, you've been watching the debates. What do you get a sense of in terms of the quality of parliamentary debates around this issue?
I have to say that the debate that happened yesterday, I think, was surprisingly more well organized than some other debates we've seen. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, 59 MPs managed to get up to speak, which I think is a lot for a one-day sitting. So I do think it is more systematic, but that doesn't mean that each of those speeches were very in-depth or particularly life-changing, but I think in terms of not understanding the law or the policy, I mean, I think our parliamentary culture over decades just have not provided for that kind of room for our MPs to really be true policymakers. Our parliament does not sit for a very long time, at least not in comparison to our Commonwealth neighbours, our Commonwealth, other Commonwealth countries, and also the role of select committees have only very recently been, been taken seriously since the PH administration put them into place, when actually that's where the bulk of these kinds of very in-depth policy matters should be debated. So I wouldn't necessarily blame our MPs for not understanding laws or policies in depth. I say, the whole parliamentary structure and system has not been tailored or designed to give our MPs that kind of time to really go through these bills in a very in-depth manner. So it is an institutional and a structural problem, Sharaad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there seems to be an urgency in terms of time, in terms of a time limit, because again, there's so much riding on this anti-hopping law for it to be passed, enacted before the next general elections. Do you think that there is enough time to make sure that all the kinks are worked out and to make sure that we're passing essentially a good law?
You're right. I do think that, firstly, I think the time sensitivity of passing this law is because of the MOU, right, which is due to expire in July, if I'm not mistaken. And also, of course, this GE15 that everyone seems to say is around the corner. So, I mean, I hope that this will not be used as an excuse to expedite and to not really consider every single angle of this very, very important issue. But for me, I do think that choosing the anti-hopping law route is already taking the shortcut compared to the recall elections proposal that was brought up earlier, right? Because that, I think, would have taken a lot more understanding, a lot more changes in the law, I suppose, a lot more engagement, especially with the Election Commission, and I think there'll be budgetary concerns as well with a recall law. So I think this is already the faster way to get things done. And also, I think in the minds of the public, party hopping is a very, very popular cause for politicians to fight against, because as we all know, after Sheraton, Malaysians are just really sick of politicians, political frogs and all that. So politically as well, I think it is just better and more appealing for politicians to go with the party hopping law pathway as opposed to the recall pathway. So yeah.
Ira, thank you for joining us on the show tonight. Ira Azhari from the think tank Ideas. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.